Hello.
Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With me today is Daniel McAdams. Daniel, good to see you this morning.
Good morning, Dr. Paul.
Well, good. We have a special guest today, a friend of mine that I've known for 30 years or so. He's the founder of Sprott Global Resources, and that is Rick Rule. Rick, good to see you this morning.
Nice to be with you, Dr. Paul.
Well, great. Lots to talk about because there's a lot of activity in the markets, and I guess what fascinates me about your career is that you probably understand as well as anybody about why prices sometimes go up and sometimes go down, but not only do you look and see that and maybe anticipate, but you sort of have to make business decisions based on this and survive, and you've survived a lot since you've been in the business. It says that you've been in the business as long as you can remember almost. So tell us a little bit about your company and what your philosophy is on how you survive under conditions that I think are artificially created by our government by having the booms and the busts.
Sprott Inc. is a Canadian domiciled and publicly listed investment manager focused on natural resources and precious metals. We have on both sides of the border been active, as you suggest, for about 3 decades. And while we invest some in general market securities, over 75% of the assets that we employ are employed in precious metals and natural resources. The consequence of that, and the consequence of the fact that these markets are highly cyclical and also highly volatile, always gives us the lead message in discussions like this, that we have learned that in natural resources and in fact in capital intensive basic industries generally, you are either a contrarian or you will be a victim. The business cycle that you spent so much time talking about to your audiences for so many years has really dictated my own commercial life.
Right. Now, on the natural resources, and you stated what they are, would that ever involve rare earth minerals, or is that something that you never get involved in?
We understand the rare earth business reasonably well, having been involved for sort of 3 decades on and off in it. I need to say that it's such a small and such a volatile sector that you need to pay specific attention for it. It's a sort of a very small and extraordinarily volatile subset of natural resources. It's also one, because of its technology applications, that has attracted an inordinate amount of attention relative to its size in markets or its importance to the economy. It's an interesting speculative subset, but investors or speculators in the sector need to subject themselves, I guess is the right phrase, to real adult supervision and not be carried away by the hype in that sector.
Right. You state that you deal a lot in junior exploration companies. Now, tell us a little bit, explain that to us about what that means. Do people come to you if they want to buy a stock on the stock market, or are people finding a company where they just buy into that company to establish a new company?
The answer to that is yes and yes, Dr. Paul. We have a boutique stock brokerage business on both sides of the border that will, of course, facilitate trades in publicly listed mining companies. Probably more than that, there are 170 investment professionals at Sprott worldwide, so we can often tell investors whether they should or should not exercise their whims with regards to junior mining companies. In addition, we're investment managers. We believe ourselves to be the largest focus source of institutional capital in the world for the minerals exploration sector. And the consequence of that is that we're probably unusually deep in our knowledge with regards to the exploration process, which is, of course, a subset of broader natural resource investing. We think that the exploration sector is analogous from an investment sense to the technology-based research and development sector that we're so familiar with here in California. That is really a knowledge-based business more than an asset-based business. And I think it's this perception, this understanding the nature of the economics of exploration that has allowed us to be really very successful over 3 decades in a sector that can be very treacherous if you misunderstand the nature of the value creation process in it.
You know, in our effort to try to expose the people and the listeners to more about foreign policy and why we believe in non-intervention, China frequently comes up. And Daniel has a question here on China and how the politics between the United States and China might affect what you do in your business.
Yeah, Rick, it's Daniel here. You know, one of the things we do is we look at the areas where economics and geopolitics intersect, and it's a very interesting area. And I know that your company does a lot of business in China, with China. And we had a show a couple of weeks ago about this conflict in the South China Sea, where as you know, where the U.S. Navy is going near these islands that China is constructing on a reef. Now, how does something like this conflict affect your view, your long-term view and investment? Do you think it's something that's serious that we should worry about? Do you worry about it? How much do you worry about it? And what do you see the outcome in the future?
Vision presentation will begin in 10 minutes.
Chinese commercial interests are extremely pragmatic, and I think the Chinese government and Chinese society is trying to interact with us in various ways. I make it a point in business dealings around the world to shy away from the normal American bad habit of telling people what they ought to do in their own societies. I would point out to your listeners and viewers that although the current Chinese actions could be viewed as provocative towards their friends, if you juxtapose the number of Chinese troops in foreign countries and the foreign conflicts that the Chinese are involved with against America's own performance by that same metric, you would see that the Chinese, at least relative to us, are extraordinarily peaceful. I, of course, probably share Dr. Paul's aversion to political interference by one culture in the affairs of another culture generally. And I share what I suspect is Dr. Paul's skepticism about a leadership profile in China where a political elite, probably numbering in the range of 20,000 people, attempts to direct most aspects of life in a society numbering something like 1.2 or 1.3 billion people. But the point of this, I guess, is that in the context of a political elite trying to determine the outcome of a society, the Chinese are hardly unique, and there's probably not too much room for Americans to lecture Chinese in that regard.
Rick, am I correct in assuming you don't get into the trading of currencies? You're not involved in that in particular, are you?
No, sir. Privately, my currency trading track record is almost unblemished by success, and I wouldn't want to impose that on spot clients.
But it seems like when you're international and dealing with it, the value of the dollar must have an effect on it. You know, when people buy and sell and do the exchanges, some people make a lot of profits, and then if they're not up to date on these currencies. So do you get involved in that at all? And how does it affect your thinking? Because when you look, right now everybody's thinking the dollar's so strong and so strong, but if you look at the dollar from 1971 on, even against all these other horrible currencies, the dollar generally goes down. And the dollar from 2009 up until recently went down sharply, and of course now it's recovered. How much do you look at these things, and does that ever have an effect on what you might do, or is it strictly the value of that particular asset that you're looking at?
We look at the dollar constantly for many reasons. We do business in many countries, although the medium of exchange on a global basis is mostly in US dollars. The dollar's hegemony is stronger than it was at any point in time in my career. I'm amused by the statement of our mutual friend Doug Casey with regards to this. He once told me that the dollar is an I owe you nothing, but the euro is a who owes you nothing. And I think that that's a sort of an interesting observation. One anecdote I think that might amuse you, Dr. Paul, is where I talked to one of the very large sovereign wealth funds about their very large holdings of US 10-year treasuries. And I pointed out that Jim Grant had described them as return-free risk, meaning that they probably absolutely positively guaranteed you a reduction in purchasing power over 10 years, and described them to my Asian counterparty as, in effect, a structured lie. My counterparty looked at me and smiled and said, I understand your point, Mr. Rule. You just need to understand that the U.S. 10-year Treasury is a very deep, very transparent, and very liquid lie, unlike the other lies that we're told.
Yeah.
And I think the near-term strength in the U.S. dollar needs to be better understood in the context of the weakness of other competing fiat currencies.
You know, in 2009 is when this Great Recession, Depression hit. I would assume that that did not shock you or surprise you that we were due for a major correction. How do you see things today? Do you anticipate another major correction like that? And if so, what might bring that about? Not that I think any of us can predict the future, but I know we always think about it.
I do think that there are a lot of factors in the United States and globally that lend themselves to destabilization. And I'm trying to be polite and use non-dramatic terms. I also think that too many people in the sort of libertarian anarcho-capitalist community fall into the trap of being sort of apocalyptics. I remember our mutual friend Gary Alexander in 2000 with the Y2K scare once said that our group needed we needed to establish a self-help group called Apocalyptics Anonymous that would acknowledge the fact that as a consequence of our reading of history, that we have successfully anticipated 25 of the last 3 declines. I find myself in that group because irrespective of my philosophical predisposition, my grasp of arithmetic is pretty good. If you will look at the narrative that existed in 2008, it was that the on-balance sheet liabilities of the federal government at $15 or $16 trillion were unsustainable. The popular narrative now would seem to be that $18 to $19 trillion is more sustainable than $16 trillion was then. A doubtful proposition from my point of view. And of course, Dr. Paul, looking at you and I and our ages, the fact that the on-balance sheet liabilities of the U.S. government are something like $80 trillion, and you and I, in our dotage, are walking manifestations of off-balance sheet liabilities. When I think about the promises that have been made to me and the promises that our society has made to each other, relative to our ability to honor those promises, I get very nervous about the possibility or perhaps the probability that this mismatch of math will someday come home to roost.
You know, Rick, there's a lot of talk in the investment markets, whether you're principally a fundamentalist or a technician. I have to confess, I'm sort of a fundamentalist. You know, since 1971, I assumed that the Fed would print a lot of money and the gold price would go up. And long term, that is the case. But when you look at your business, do you put yourself in one category or another, or do you just sort of split it up, or would you lean toward looking at the fundamentals long term when you're making recommendations?
I'm absolutely a fundamentalist. I have learned that in the very near term, technical analysis is very useful in terms of timing. And technical analysis is also useful for me in determining the delta between my own perceptions and the perceptions of the market. In other words, it's a tool that causes me to test my precepts. And if you're managing billions of dollars, which we are, in a sector that is as capital intensive, cyclical, and volatile as ours, any tool which causes you rather than allows you to test your precepts on a weekly basis is very, very worthwhile. So while I'm not personally a practitioner of technical analysis, I do utilize the analytical skills of technical analysts who are in our employ, both to test my own theses and also for near-term timing decisions.
Rick, I read someplace where your customers are both rich and not quite so rich. If that's correct, let me know that. And also, since we're going to close this in a few minutes, list exactly where and emphasize where anybody that's listening would like to contact you and find out more about your investments.
Well, friends of Dr. Paul's are friends of mine. The easiest thing to do is email me personally. That's RRULE, RRULE at sprottglobal.com, or call me at 800-477-7853. The other thing that I might encourage your listeners to do would be to subscribe to the Sprott blog, Sprott's Thoughts. You can go to www.sprottsthoughts.com and click on subscribe. I guarantee that your people will get their money's worth because it's absolutely free.
Very, very good, Rick, and thank you very much for, excuse me, for being with us today.
A pleasure to talk to you. It's been too long.
This has been fascinating for me, especially to meet with an old friend that has been in the investment business for a long time, and he has survived many ups and downs, and so it'd be very worthwhile to check in on the Rick Rule investment firm. But there's no doubt in my mind that the ups and downs are going to continue, and Rick's been in the business a long time, and he has survived all these. But all of us have to survive the oncoming problems that we face, both economic and political. The fact that we have a crisis in the Middle East ongoing, a crisis with economies around the world, and a crisis with the currencies, it means that we have to do everything possible to understand what's happening politically, and as well as the important reason why we have to protect ourselves and our families, because regardless, we cannot depend on the government, and the more people that are protected, the better. And the one thing about Rick is he offers an insight into worldwide investments, and quite frankly, that's probably a big advantage rather than thinking that you can survive by just dealing with our own government and our own tax system. So once again, I want to thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report, and please come back soon.